plug right here. Tonight we're going to be talking about spirits in stones, and there's two things I like. The most things I like talking about is spirits, and I like to get stoned. Well, not necessarily. Whoa, I lost my picture. I went crazy there. All right. So anyway, two things. Well, Glenn, welcome to the program. And before we get going, why don't you just talk to the audience here? Tell them a little bit about yourself and why you decided to write this book.
Well, a little bit about myself. I'm a radio frequency engineer. Work for the local utility company, putting up radio equipment. And I have a background as an outdoor guide, having been New York State licensed guide for almost 30 years. That involved rock climbing and going up the cliff faces and bringing folks up there and making sure they had a fun, safe time. And I guess, I had a connection to the stone, certainly, when I was doing that, a physical connection to the stone. I don't do as much of that anymore, but for the last 10 years or so, I've been investigating stones in the woods. By going out and visiting them and wandering around and trying to understand who put these there. And what I'm talking about primarily are stone cairns and unusual boulders and unusual stone walls that we find in the Northeast. And how I got involved in researching them is also kind of a roundabout way in that in my work as an RF engineer, I got involved with a cell tower siting committee, and some of the folks who were opposing the cell tower location, used some of the stones in their woods as being possibly Native American in origin. I found it very interesting that excuse, that theory, was very quickly dismissed as not being credible, and I found that interesting. And then I ended up involved with this group, NERA, the New England Antiquities Research Association, where I served 2 terms as vice president. And they primarily are a resource for researching and protecting these types of sites.
Now, as far as spirits in stones, you talk about the secrets of the Metholithic America and some of the ancient cultural connections that they have. Are you suggesting, I'm just going by the title alone, and I've got questions, I've read your book and I have your book, but are you suggesting that the stones have spirits?
Well, in a sense, yes. If they are Native American sacred sites, and I'm not saying that they all are because they haven't been proven to be, but there's a movement out there, and it's growing, that Native Americans were involved with building in stone in the Northeast, and aligning those constructions in many cases with events on the horizon. This would be considered observational astronomy. So I think this was part of their worldview and part of their belief system. And if you study the Native American culture and their ancient mythology and their ancient spirituality, it very much involves a universal energy that kind of permeates everything. These sites would, in some cases, be considered their churches or their center of their spiritual activity. It's interesting, in our area in the north, in the Catskill and Hudson Valley, we have a lot of site locations called Devil's Tombstone, Devil's Acre, Devil's Path, Devil's Kitchen. And these are certainly places that the Dutch settlers knew to be centers of where the Native Americans carried out their activities, because to the Dutch, the Calvinist settlers, of course, what the Native Americans were doing was devil worshiping. But of course, we know that for the most part, the natives had a very peaceful spiritual existence that involved a very close and intimate connection to nature that we really don't have today. But I do think there's a very strong spiritual aspect to these stones. Through agency, I would say. through the act of the people who found these to be important and constructed them, placed that energy within them, and attached that spiritual value.
Well, when you look at quartz, you can actually, you can make a radio from quartz. And now, I assume because it vibrates, but and I don't even know if that qualifies as a stone, I'm not a stone expert, but what causes a quartz to vibrate?
Well, it resonates at a specific frequency, as all rocks do. Of course, quartzite, and the clearer the quartzite crystal, the better the resonance of the frequency that's being transmitted through it. Quartz crystals, as you mentioned, are used in transmitters and are used in transceiving. I've always found that fascinating. I always wondered what the connection with the ancients and how they used crystals and how they used different types of elements to exploit and tap into nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, right there is kind of what pisses me off about ancient cultures, because I feel like they have so much that they could have taught us, and of course, the Pilgrims coming over, and early America maybe say that even as was with the conquistadors would see the Aztecs, cutting the hearts out of people, meant they instantly said they all had demons, and I could see, to that extreme perhaps, but there's a lot that we could have learned if we just didn't try to annihilate their race and everything that they had. Now, how would the Indians know that anything could vibrate? I mean, we know that scientifically, but how long ago did say the Eurocentric kind of culture discover that quartz and crystals do resonate? But the Indians knew that. How did the Indians know it way before science was even around?
Well, that's a great question. That's one of the mysteries that we try to study, and I tend to believe it was through some type of divination, divining, some type of intuition. I think when you go far enough back in time, we used our brains in ways that we don't anymore. Of course, our brains are still capable of doing amazing things. We can pull up to an intersection in a car in a split second. We can judge, if it's safe to pull out based on a very quick calculation of space and distance and speed and momentum, and we go, okay, it's my intuition tells me it's safe to pull out. I think intuition was used in a much different way in great antiquity. It was used to divine things, to understand nature in a very precise manner that now we need technology to measure. But when you talk about Christopher Dunn does a lot of research in Egypt, where he measures with space age equipment the surfaces, the angles and the flatness of surfaces, and finds them to be within the specifications of what would be expected to have been created with what we would consider high technology. Mm-hmm. To get it, the tolerances that exact, that flat, that corner so close to perfect in 90 degrees. They didn't have tools to measure it, but they had their eye and they had their intuition to tell them when it was flat and when it was perfect. And I think it was much more finely attuned for their purposes in those times.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have a question for you. This is from our YouTube chat. We have several chats going, and we have our Fast Blast. So 3 different ways people are communicating with the show right now. He says, have you ever investigated the sacred mounds across America? And if so, what do you think they represent?
Well, I'm not sure what mounds the questioner is referring to. Of course, there's the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio that has been found to be much older than originally attributed by archaeologists. I think they first thought it was built around 500, and then they said 1,500 years ago, and then 2,000 years. It just keeps getting pushed back further and further, and of course that's because it was built on top of a site that was much older, and as we see with a lot of sacred sites and churches, they were co-opted from previous cultures that found that same spot to be very, very sacred. So when we find the mounds and the constructions of the if we're talking about the Adena, the Hopewellian culture of the Midwest and the Mississippian Valley, which, if you go back 5,000 years, probably rivaled what you found in the Nile Valley around the same time. They were building monumental constructions, and again, having them be the center, in many cases, kind of an axis mundi of their spiritual and political world.
Well,
So that, you know,
one of the
the
most
mounds are very significant. Sorry, go ahead.
now one of the most famous, I guess you could say, rocks is Dome of the Rock. I mean, everybody's fighting over that rock area there. Now, that obviously it's not in the Northeast United States, but there are whole countries fighting over this rock. You know, the position of this rock, and I guess there's a rock there. I haven't been there, but anyway, Dome of the Rock. So, but it's housed, and so there have been times where cultures or religions have talked about rocks or put great emphasis on rocks. For instance, I know that biblically there's a scripture that says, where God says, if somebody didn't say something, that he will command the rocks to cry out. And basically what you're saying, maybe that's a scientific plausibility.
I suppose so. I mean, certain rocks, big stones in history have been known to be singing stones or resounding stones. There is one in Malta, I think it's called Baal, that was found to resound at a very specific frequency. There's a chapter in the book on Malta and the temple culture there, which is really fascinating. A lot of folks don't know about Malta and the megalithic culture there and the temples that are the oldest standing structures on Earth. They're older than the pyramids and Stonehenge by 1,000 years, and these were built by a very peaceful ancient culture that had a consciousness that was again tuned away differently than our brains were, and they used sound and they used unseen forces of energy to to shape their worldview and to allow them probably in some ways to alter their states of consciousness so they could in their realm communicate with the spirit world.
Now I know you can get massages with hot stones. Now I haven't had one, but I'm just wondering if you, and maybe somebody out there watching has had one, but I do know they offer that where they heat these stones up. And I wonder if not only why the use of the stone is important, if you get more than just say a hot rock on your back or backside, wherever you want to put it, hopefully nowhere wrong. But, is it that you get more, you get some vibration there as well, some transference from the rock or the stone?
Well, I think that's probably why. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert in back massages or hot stone massages. I've heard of them, haven't had the chance to have one myself. But yeah, I think the point is that the stone retains the heat and then transmits it through conduction and convection and deep into your muscle, into your bone. Mm-hmm. And heat is good, and the stone retains it and transmits it. Mm-hmm. So in that sense. I'm thinking of the Native American sweat ceremony where they use hot stones and pour water on them and create steam and temperatures that, through an act of chanting in these sweat lodges produces an altered state and again transmits into the spirit world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, not to be spooky or paganistic here, but I respect rocks. I mean, it just seems like they're just, every time you see one, you think something ancient is here. Like, what do they know? Where did it come from? I know in many places in the United States, particularly in the Ozarks, there are streams where stones, I mean, every time there's a gully washer, massive stones are washed down these rivers, but they seem to be never ending. I don't even know where the rock's coming from. But when you see one, it instantly just puts you to a date. It makes you think way back in time, was it a mountain or what did that rock see or what can they hear? Now, some people claim, Glenn, that water has memory and said because water never goes away, it's just reused. And so it knows everything and has memory. And there's been scientific tests to show something to that effect. But I'm wondering, do rocks or stones have memory?
Well, in a sense, they do. If we can take that one that's behind you or up on the screen now, this North Shawangunk Dolmen. This is quite a large stone, probably in the 20 to 30 ton range, and it's a compass stone in that it's got a very prominent north nose where that measuring rod is on. It's also got a west nose off to the right and a north and an east nose. So it points the direction and helps people know and remember where north, where the cardinal points and direction are, which was very important in ancient times to understand that. And this stone also aligns with another stone. It may come up in the slide. I did provide it, called Reconnoiter Rock, over on Picamous Mountain, about 18 miles. There it is, 18 miles from the North Shawangunk Dolmen. It's got line of sight, both of these on ridge tops that do see one another. There's nothing obstructing the view from one to the other. So I run a path profile and using software, and you can see that it's a clear view from this one up in Picamous over to the other one, Shawangunk, across the Rondout Valley, and it's set up at a angle to each other that is a winter solstice sunrise, summer solstice sunset angle. So the theory is potentially that there was a group of people in ancient times who set these types of stones up so that they could commemorate the solstice alignments where the sun would appear to arise and set on the longest and shortest days of the year, and also oriented so that you could understand where the cardinal directions are. This one as well, that sun shade line that's facing us, is pointing north. West to the right and east to the left, and we can see the sun is in the position where it's setting off to the west and shining on that western face. So yes, they do have memory, and again, it's a memory that is placed in them through agency of humans.
Are you familiar with here in Indiana a place called Yellowwood Forest where there's a giant rock up in a tree?
No, I have not heard of that.
Yeah, Google.
Wild. How big a rock?
400 or 500 pounds.
So as the tree grew, this rock was in one of its crotches and just kind of grew with it?
Well, that's the scientific explanation, yes.
I haven't seen such a thing. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And people go there all the time, and there may be more than one too, but it's like scientifically, okay, you can say, all right, the little tree was underneath that rock, and he tried to sneak out on one side, but he wasn't happy, so he put another branch going on the other side of the rock, and then so it's in the middle of four. And then of course some of the theories get to where, okay, Bigfoot put it up in there. That's my favorite theory. Aliens dropped it in there, but anyway, there's no reason for this rock to be up in this tree. I mean, you could say, well, it pushed it up. Well, okay.
Well, and scientifically, I have a problem with that because. Well, if it's a 400-pound rock, gravity. The tree grew. The rock didn't grow. It was 400 pounds when it began. So, I don't see how the tree would overcome the forces of gravity. How high up in the air is this rock in the tree? About
30 foot.
Yeah. I wouldn't go wandering under the base of that tree. That's unusual. I wonder if there are other documented cases of rocks growing high up into trees like that, or as you say, how and who and when would have placed it in that fold in the tree 30 feet up.
Yeah. And then surely in some of your research, you must come across. Now we've had guests on the show, and the title would be out of place artifacts or out of place objects. But what about out of place rocks, where a rock is not even around the general geographical area, but it's in a certain place, and it looks like it may have been placed there. Have you ever come across something like that?
Well, we have in our region what are called glacial erratics, and a glacial erratic in geologic terms, it's something geologists would talk about, is a stone that doesn't belong. It's come from somewhere else. In many cases, great distances, moved by glacier action. So a glacier will be coming down from the north, and it'll go through the granite of the Adirondacks or of New Hampshire, and pick a nice piece up and take it, a few hundred miles south. And then once that glacier receded and pulled away, that big boulder came out and, dropped down where it was. And now the geologist said, how the heck did this get here? So the glaciers moved it. And, we have a lot of glacier erratics in our region that have been, in my case, identified by ancient populations and used and manipulated in ways that fit their belief system.
Speaking of geographics, moving out west a little bit. Again, I know that your location there is mainly in the Northeast, but what about the moving rocks out there in Nevada? They move across the desert.
Now, I'm not sure if I know which rock specifically you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's in part of the Salt Flats. Somebody in one of our chats popped that up. Give me a link or something on that. Yeah, there's a phenomena of rocks moving across this flat desert where there's no wind. It is you see the rocks, and the next day you'll see the rocks leave a trail going across the desert. You haven't seen that?
Oh, now that you're mentioning it, I may have. So yes, you can see that they've been the desert floor has been scribed by the movement of these rocks.
Yeah, right. Yeah, somebody in one of the live chats dropped me a line on that and tell me where that's at, and we'll get that to the. So yeah, I mean, again, there's rocks moving. So rocks, there's a lot of. I say rocks, but you say stones. I kind of like stones because it reminds me of the Rolling Stones. All right, let's get to another question. Out of this is
That's
from,
one way a rock. That's one way a rock could move.
What's that?
If it's a rolling stone.
Ah, there you go. All right, let's get to another question here. This is from Raul Sanchez. Have you ever heard of the mud fossil theory?
I can't say I have. Mud fossil. No. Sounds interesting, but I have not heard of that.
Okay. And here's another one for you, another question. Do any of these sites commemorate a battle site, perhaps?
Yes, they absolutely do. These Cairn fields that we have in the Northeast are known to have been markers of important events, such as a battle. Uncas was a Narragansett, I believe, and a chief in Connecticut, and there was a big battle. I want to say King Philip's War that took place, and there are battlefields that are commemorated with stone piles that were built by the native population and are still used today by the tribe in modern times as memorials to the battle that took place there. So there are these cairns are used for many different reasons, but one of them is as markers of important events. It could be where a chief died in a battle. It could be where a battle occurred. It could be burial sites that were used for generations. Oh, there we go, a scribe stone. So, how did these move? Okay, interesting that they, like in this picture, they're all kind of arcing and making a right-hand turn.
Yeah.
And
but they're clearly not being blown across the desert. They're not around it.
Right, and it would take a huge wind. I'm not saying I can't say for sure whether a hurricane force wind would blow something like this. We just had a huge storm here in the Northeast in our region. As I said, I work for a utility, and
can you see this?
We just did a huge. Yeah, I saw that. We just did a huge cleanup, so it makes a 90-degree turn there.
Yeah, what's up with that? Now,
blown by the wind.
There's no way.
It blew one way and then another. But I also am skeptical that wind is responsible for this. It looks like a pretty legitimate mystery from the photographic evidence. You'd have to say, okay, what's going on here? And I'm not sure if there is an explanation that would suit the scientific community, but it's an interesting phenomenon. Obviously, if it was people playing jokes, like some accuse some of the crop circles of being created by hoaxsters.
Yeah, hey,
in
that 90, in that 90-degree one. I mean, that kind of reminds me of what they claim about UFOs, Glenn. They say, you can, if you're watching something in the sky and it makes a 90-degree turn, you got intelligence behind it. So this 90-degree turn doesn't seem like it's veering off course. Seems like it wanted to go a different direction. And so, wow. So a lot of things. So there is mysteries involved with stones, and like I say, I have great respect for them. I like to hunt them. I like to find fossils and stuff. I still don't go with some of the theories about how fossils are made. All right, here's a question for you. It says, I don't know if this is a rock question. It says, was Alexander the Great and the Ptolemy dynasty buried in southern Illinois? If so, how did they get there?
No, that's a little beyond mine. My field, I couldn't begin to speculate.
Okay. All right. And by the way, Jade, our moderator, put in that was Death Valley National Park for a lot of
Oh,
these
is where
rocks.
these scribe stones are being found to move?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the ground is trembling, but even that, it's hard to grasp how that would cause these stones to move in such a straight fashion,
Hmm.
or to make a bend like that.
Hmm.
Uh, some kind of natural phenomenon, perhaps, that we don't understand. Certainly don't. I mean, I always say science is like a dart game. Everything there is to know is the entire dartboard, and every time we think of a theory and try to prove it, it's like throwing a dart at that great pool of knowledge. Yet we're only touching a few points of what there is to know. There's
Hmm.
far more we don't know than we do,
Hmm.
and of course, sometimes we come up with a theory and uh, throw another dart, and it knocks that dart out, and we have a new theory that replaces it. But
Hmm.
there's a lot of unknown things going on
All
out
right.
there that we don't have explanation for, and it's important to recognize that.
For those of you who just joined the broadcast, we do have on our newsmaker line Glenn Chrisberg. We're talking about his book, Spirits in Stone, The Secrets of Metalithic America. And I like secrets, man. I like to reveal secrets, talk about secrets, because anything that's not a secret is usually some kind of controlled information. Of course, I think Obama said he who has a secret, he who has something to hide, who has something to hide is probably committing a crime. All right, so here's another question from our YouTube.
I thought it was Trump that said that.
They all said that. Wait a minute. Let me
There
think.
you go.
Trump or Obama? Which got more rocks or rocks in the head? I don't know. All right, let's get on this one here. Sansui out of the YouTube says any cool ancient rock wall structures in Maine where they live.
Yes, very, very many. If you go to the NERA website, nera.org, and check the chapter in Maine, the state coordinator up there has been compiling site reports going back at least 50 years of the stone walls in the Northeast, in New England in particular. That almost looks like it's making some kind of symbol. So there was a survey, actually a U.S. census that was conducted in 1880, where they did what was called a stone fence survey in New England, including Maine, and they found incredibly 240,000 miles of stone wall in that region. So if you think about that, that's enough to reach to the moon. It's enough stone wall to wrap around the Earth 10 times. And it really couldn't have all have been built in the 200 years since the Europeans arrived before 1880. There just wasn't enough of a wall building population to build that amount of wall. So a lot of it must have been pre-existing and already there when the Europeans and the settlers arrived.
Now there's some mounds here in Indiana called well, it's just called the mounds. The mounds. In fact, they made a mounds mall right out of it. But I've been to that mounds, and not necessarily has to do with rocks, but there's a lot of talk about ancient America of finding giants within these mounds. Have you segued into any of that research?
I have. I know a researcher, Jim Vieira, who's done a lot of research and has published on the large skeletons that have been found, mostly in the Adena mount, the earthen mounds in the Midwest. But there have been large skeletons found and reported all over the country, including New York. Many of them documented in the newspaper. So Jim's come on to a legitimate mystery, a legitimate, in some ways, cover up. A lot of this information on large skeletons was reported to the Smithsonian. Now, of course, they claim like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, they've got so many archives that they can't find the stuff from the 1800s. They can't find this documentation to show that these skeletons were found. And in many cases, they seem to be from a race of, as you say, giants, people who had great stature.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the further back you go in antiquity in the United States, the more you see of these types of examples of great human beings in much larger size.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there have also been documents of similar finds in other parts of the world, Turkey, the Middle East, the Far East. So it's not unique to America.
There is massive stone wall right angle structures underneath I think in the Sea of Japan. And then, of course, there's giant steps, stone steps here, I think maybe in South America. but they're clearly not. They don't seem to be hewn out of rock. They seem to be with some kind of machinery that we don't have never seen on that scale, and that goes to some of your conjectures that the ancients may have had technology to deal with that, maybe even into the pyramids. What do you say about that?
I think it's fascinating. They did a survey of the Hudson River and found giant walls that cross it that were in some way created before the river, was there. Uh, when you talk about high technology in great ancient times, there are references to it. We even find examples like the Antikythera mechanism and the Baghdad battery, where they had the ability to create things that were far beyond what we expected them to be able to create for that time period. And I do think there was a devolution that took place in ancient culture. If you go back to the Egyptian, the Greeks, the Romans, they all had a more sophisticated society and culture the earlier in their existence, and then devolved. And we could talk a little bit about the what could be causing that, and the energies in the universe that could be changing over great periods of time that affect our consciousness and affect the rise and fall of technology, of civilizations, of different ages of mankind, because there is that connection to all this.
By the way, for those watching or listening to the program, if you have a short rock stone story, you found a rock, your luck changed, you found a rock, you had bad luck, you got healed by a rock, you've seen something mystical, you saw a rock move, any kind of story like that, well, then ship that over either on our YouTube chat or our website chat, or additionally you can send it through the Fast Blast link. It's an email client on the left side of the website. Send those stories in here, we'll get them to Glenn while we're have him on the program. And by the way, Glenn, as you know, at 9 o'clock we take a 5-minute break. We just take you out of the picture and you turn your sound down, and we bring you back at about 9:06. So be ready for that. All right, question from Soteriology 101. They always try to trip me up with these names, these avatar names. What was the Devil's Tower in southern Wyoming the stump of a giant petrified tree?
I don't think it was. There may be some legend to that effect that local native tribes might believe. I don't know that I've actually heard that, but I think there is again, a kind of a mainstream geologic explanation for that kind of. I believe it's a volcanic plug. A remnant of some type of lava dome that formed in such a way that you have these dihedrals, these great corners and angles. But it's a nice kind of romanticized idea and notion that, it may have been.
With the lies, the control of history. Now they're just rewriting history, carte blanche at universities. It just seems that it's going to get harder and harder to find the truth. Not only do they hide stuff like this, suppose that was a giant tree, that doesn't fit well with the chronology of world history. It goes into simplified form. There's a puddle of goo, lightning strikes it, out comes fruit trees, giraffes, monkeys, man, clouds, I don't know, the whole thing. And then, there's a progression there, but stories like that don't fit. And the giants in ancient history don't fit. Ancient technology doesn't fit with the narrative. They've got it simplified to Christopher Columbus discovered, sailed ocean blue in 1492, and then, sing the song and that's your history. But it's not like that. Not only do we not get what is arguably, there's evidence that says something that there's another Earth history or prehistory. But once that's gone, but still they're rewriting the regular history to shape it to current trends and current political correctness. So how do we get how do we pass along the knowledge that, say, people such as yourself find, because you're pointing out some mysteries in your book that don't fit with those narratives?
Well, that's exactly right. In the Northeast, the narrative is that the natives did not build in stone and did not conduct any kind of observational astronomy. If you talk to the archaeologists at the local universities, they dismiss that. But it's starting to change. We've had some watershed events that have began to kind of pull back the veil so that the truth can be seen, and so that the skeptics, who in this case are the scholars and the academics, are starting to scratch their head a little bit more and say, well, maybe we need to consider some type of alternate. And that's basically because a lot of the evidence is starting to back that up. You know, you have, for the first time, say with Native Americans, you have archaeologists and anthropologists that are Native American in their heritage. There's a movement going on in Canada where they are claiming land based on a reinterpretation of the artifacts, and you know what the historians called teepee holes and teepee post holes. The archaeologists who are Native American are saying, no, these are calendar sites. These were posts that were used for tracking the position of the sun. And, you know, we were here in the Northeast in America. As I said, the natives simply are not credited with doing this, yet everywhere else in the country they are, in the Midwest, in the Southwest, Central America, Mexico, South America. All ancient cultures are credited with building in stone, building monuments, aligning them to the events on the horizon and in the sky. And to say that it didn't happen in the Northeast is kind of hogwash. And it is starting to change. There are sites that are being documented. There was a symposium up at Colgate University 2 years ago, hosted by Anthony Avini, and Avini is our premier archaeoastronomer in the United States, professor, very respected. He's done all his work in Central and South America, yet he was contacted by a cultural resource manager up at Fort Drum in the Adirondacks, this woman, Lori Rush, who's an archaeologist, and she discovered a site on Fort Drum that was an effigy site, that was a calendar site, an alignment site to star and sun rises and sets, and it couldn't be ignored. And he held this symposium and invited the academics, and this is why it was so important, because for the first time you had these three groups coming together. You had the academics, you had the state and federal regulators, and you had the tribal preservation officers, the tribal leaders and elders coming together at Colgate, and they held it at this visualization center, which is a planetarium where you sit back and can look up and they can recreate history in the sky based on the stories of the natives. So it was very fascinating. And what the folks from the Parks and Historic Preservation community, this was Department of Interior representatives and folks from Fish, Game, and Wildlife, who oversee the federal lands, for the Northeast, they admitted this stuff was not on their radar and wasn't part of the narrative and needed to be looked at and taken seriously, because a lot of it is threatened and getting destroyed by development.
Okay. All right. Glenn, Chris Berg, we're here at the top of the hour. We take a 5-minute break. Anything you'd like to say about this book? I have in my background. You go ahead. How folks can get it, or what's a quick synopsis of it?
Well, I think it's available online. I always like to recommend local bookstores, but probably unless you're in the Northeast, you're going to have to reach out to one of your online retailers. It's hoping to build a case that these things are much more than what they are dismissed as, which is just another early American or colonial stone wall, kind of a dime a dozen. I think they're far more important than that, and hope the case is made in this book.
Okay, we're going to take you out of the picture, mute your mic, and we'll have you back in about 5 minutes.
All right, very good, thanks.
Glenn, welcome back.
Hey, Daniel.
Man, we had a lot of great questions come in during the break there, and I want to start with this one here, because this is where we want to head a little bit, and I've got a lot of other questions coming up too. This is from Joyce out of the YouTube. How do we know that the whole world isn't alive, a living body dependent on all of this sentient beings?
We don't know that. I think that's a very compelling theory, the Gaia theory, that the world is an organism, and I put a lot of credence into that. So, there's a frequency known as the Schumann frequency. I don't know if you know about that. Yes. It's generally between about 6 and 11 hertz, very much matched with our brainwave frequencies. And that frequency very recently has been found to spike. Sometimes it goes up to 18 hertz, sometimes as high as 36. In fact, it's never been up to 36 hertz before. And the Schumann frequency is considered to be the frequency of the planet, of the kind of the resonance that our planet puts out. And I think it's very interesting that it's very closely related to the energy that our brain waves put out, the frequencies. And I always wonder which is driving which. It doesn't have to be that the Schumann frequency is creating the resonance with our brain waves or is in sync with them. It could be that our combined consciousness of energy from all human brains are driving that frequency. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that is the lower frequencies, 6, 8, are considered kind of the meditative, peaceful type of frequencies. And once you get up above 15, 20 hertz, you're talking about stress, you're talking about anxiety, you're talking about, a lot of what the human race is going through right now, in the sense that, many of our psychological, spiritual needs are not being fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. We're talking in the first hour about the rewriting of history or the elimination of history, the spoon-fed, boxed history that we're given. And there's been so many lies regarding that. We were talking about the whether or not that one rock structure was a gigantic tree. And I gotta tell you, I'm defaulting toward tree. And I'll tell you why, because so much history has been erased that I'm going to say to the other side, you prove that it's just plain Jane from point A to B in a straight line, because maybe life is circular. We mentioned the Indian culture a lot of times, as you know, would be there's say life is a circle and goes around. But I'm just, there's just so much rewriting. I'm sort of defaulting toward the more esoteric, sort of enigmatic type view of history, because I just don't like the crap that I'm spoon fed by all the normal sources. Let's get to another question. It says, do you know anything about the archaic village site in Dresden, Maine?
I've heard references to it, but I don't really know much about it. By archaic, I'm guessing they're referring to the period, the archaic period of Indian culture. That would have been after the Paleo, but before the woodland. So there are. I'm thinking Dresden, Maine is on the coast, but I'm not positive. Mm-hmm. But there was a very large maritime culture in Paleo times, in archaic times, quite sophisticated, maybe a remnant of a group of people from the first migration from Northern Europe that came across the Atlantic ice, as the Solutrean theory is referred to. Mm-hmm. So I don't know the specifics of the Dresden site, other than I think it's supposed to have been a very good example of a archaic village. And of course, in Paleo times, a village really isn't supposed to exist. These were supposed to have been hunter-gatherers that traveled from spot to spot, mm-hmm. taking what they could from the land. So I think what it points to, and I speak about this quite at length in the book, is that, my book is I should mention Mavor and Dix, Manitou, wonderful book by James Mavor and Byron Dix, seminal, because it certainly influenced me and prodded me on. And the subtitle to Manitou is The Sacred Landscape of New England's Native Civilization. So right there, that presupposes that there was a civilization here. And of course, that was what I like to refer to as a convenient untruth. There, of course, was a civilization, and the further back you go, the more sophisticated it was. And what they're realizing is that there were places, probably like Dresden, but other places in our area locally along the Hudson River, there were places that have been continually inhabited as long as there have been people in the region, which keeps getting pushed back. It used to be 10,000 years, now it's 12. There's finding evidence of 15,000. And of course, in California, there's evidence of humans going back 130,000 years that's now being looked at. Right. So the fact that they, or I should say the non-fact that they were not sedentary and that they were roamers is not true. They settled. They had time to build population centers and to develop sophisticated belief systems, and they're not credited for that in the Northeast.
Now, as much as I respect the ancient Indian culture, I got to say there was an event, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. I think the Army Corps of Engineers discovered something. I think it was along the Missouri River, the skeletons and artifacts. But the skeletons they found predated the Indians. While the Indians have billions of dollars that go to them as a result of being the first nation, the first people here. Well, this thing that they found, the evidence they found predated them. And so the Indians demanded that the Army Corps of Engineers cover that site. And then they did that. They did that with helicopters. They put big boulders there, big stones and tree trunks to cover up this whole bank to kind of erase a history because they did not want any other history. So there may have been cultures here before the Indians, but they always do claim that they were first.
Well, now we're talking about the peopling of America and who were the first here and where did they come from. Of course, and there are some theories. There's an interesting book, American Genesis, saying that life began in this hemisphere and not, in fact, in the Eastern Hemisphere, where we all believe it began. I don't know if some of your listeners might be familiar with Michael Cremo. Michael has done a lot of work showing ancient cultures, ancient evidence of ancient civilization and high technology going back, hundreds of thousands of years. Mm-hmm. Things that are anomalies that have been buried deep in the ground and discovered, and it just doesn't fit with the narrative, so it's kind of dismissed. And native tribes are not above being political any more than we are. If it suits their purpose to do something that's politically expedient and maybe not exactly within what we would call proper, I'm not saying I understand it, but they've been handed such a raw deal. I can't imagine that they wouldn't look to take advantage of anything they could to kind of level the playing field, mm-hmm. give themselves a chance. I think it's interesting what you say, and I wonder if it was a local federally recognized tribe that, was finding evidence of a different bloodline inhabiting their land before they did. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about the difference between 1,500 years ago or 1,500 BC, 3,000 years ago or more, there is a very convoluted history of how peoples have entered our continent and traveled around and intermingled. And, not an easy thing to nail down.
Right. All right. We have this question from Kevin in Massachusetts. He says, I'm from Ulster County, New York. Are you familiar with Philip Imbrogno's research about ancient stone and his book, Celtic Mysteries of the Northeast?
I am. I'm familiar with Philip and his work. In some ways, it got me started because I did buy that book many years ago, and I'm familiar with the megalithic chambers in Putnam and Dutchess County, hundreds of them that are very enigmatic and are considered by the historians to be root cellars, but of course they're not. All you have to do is examine them, and you see that they are nothing like root cellars. Philip's work is also fascinating, of course, because he makes a connection with aliens, and he makes a connection with electromagnetism, and he makes a connection, as you mentioned, with Celtic monasticism, and that the early Celtic culture visited this region and built these types of structures. I don't really know for sure. I've toured these chambers. They're quite amazing. They're definitely megalithic. There's nothing like them except what you see in Northwest megalithic Europe. They are sometimes referred to as eye chambers because they look like the shape of an eye. Many of them are oriented to the winter solstice sunrise. I'm talking to you from Ulster County. That's my part of the woods. Mm-hmm. And I am familiar with Philip's work. He's been again, very much dismissed by the academic community. He's almost in some ways been smeared, he's very speculative. He connects these things to many different.
That's being smeared being smeared is the first response from the system as it tries to reject an unwanted organism trying to break through the system there like that. Hey, question: somebody says, Azura from YouTube says, do you believe that stones can be levitated through frequencies?
Uh, I'm I think it's possible. I think this is some of the technology that may be lost from ancient times. There are some accounts. I believe there are some accounts that were documented by Child Hatcher or Hatcher Childish. I'm trying to remember his name. I know him from Ancient Aliens on TV. But I've read some of his books, and they talk about some anecdotal evidence of, I believe it's German officers in Tibet after World War I, before World War II, who witnessed monks levitating stones up a mountainside using frequency and chanting and different types of instruments. I don't dismiss it offhand. I do know the power of frequencies, and the power is extreme if it's focused, and I don't put it beyond the capability of ancient humans to have moved stones with sound and with frequency.
We just were looking at stones moving around in Death Valley. Hey, our moderator Jade sent this question in. It says, "What do you make of the prehistoric stone balls found in Costa Rica and Asia?"
Very, very interesting. Again, I haven't studied them extensively. I'm aware of them. I know in Costa Rica they found, I believe, hundreds of these spheres. And again, enigmatic. They don't really understand where they came from or why people would have done this and what their purpose is. I think some of the measurements of them have shown them to in some cases to be quite round. So the question comes in, how were they formed? So I'm not that familiar with other ones. It's sites around the world. I think I've heard references to one or two and seen some pictures indicating that it's not just isolated to Costa Rica, but that you do see this elsewhere. So I think there's a mystery there that we're not really right now equipped to answer.
Hey, another question for Jade. Do you have any knowledge of the method that was used to move the stones at Coral Castle in Florida?
Oh yeah, that's a wonderful place. I haven't visited it. There's some people who speculate that there may have been some levitation involved with how that was done. I think there was one gentleman, I'm not remembering his name right now, who did all the work on his own behind. He shielded his site from view so nobody could really see it. Although I remember seeing some pictures of tripods with a strange device attached to the top that people were kind of scratching their heads about. So yeah, I'm familiar with Coral Castle, but I just think it's considered a mystery how it was done. Here in the Catskills, there's a site called Opus 40, which a guy named Harvey Fite created on his own, moving megaliths and creating a land sculpture that's several acres in size. It's the type of thing somebody would look at 1,000 years from now and kind of say, wow, how was this done? And then they'd be really impressed if they were to discover that a single person did it on their own during their lifetime. There's an interesting story about stones that were moved in China a great distance. These were stones that were noticed by an American engineer who was visiting there, I think a few decades ago, and he noticed that in the Forbidden City there were a couple of ramparts on the sides of the great staircase that goes up into the entrance. The grand entrance to the Forbidden City has this immense staircase, and on the two sides of it are these immense stones that, to look at, you'd say, how the hell did they move these stones? These are hundreds and hundreds of tons. And then they, as in Stonehenge, they discovered that the quarry that these were hewn from was hundreds of miles away. And they said, well, how the heck did they do this? And in the case of the Chinese and with the Forbidden City, we're not talking that far back in antiquity. We're talking the 15th century, the 1400s. I'm not sure what dynasty it was, but they kept great records. And this engineer was very curious, and he started consulting the old Chinese records and found reference to specifically how they moved these stones, these giant stones. And they did it on what was referred to as a river of ice. And they created it by drilling wells all along a road that led from the quarry to the building site. And then they flooded it from the wells, and then they waited till the winter, and they had a road of ice, and they used 300 men in ropes, and they pulled these stones. It was all specified a distance of 3 miles a day for so many days, and got these things into place. So, if there's a will, there's a way. Humans are very ingenious. They've come up with ways to adapt and get what they need from the resources that are here. A lot of people ask me if I believe in ancient aliens and if we're visitations and were they responsible for doing a lot of the things that we can't explain today, like pyramids. And my answer is, I think humans were capable of doing it all at some point in time, but it's not mutually exclusive. They could have had help. There could have been visitations periodically, a transmission of knowledge, of skills that could have been assimilated into different cultures and then diffused around the globe. So, I don't rule these out, these things.
I was just thinking because of the title of your book, Spirits in Stone. There's I believe it's in North Carolina, a place called Stone Mountain, and in that geographical area, there's a lot of UFO activity. So definitely something going on there in Stone Mountain. I think they even made a movie out of it called Alien Abduction, and then. In the Bible, Jesus went up to a mountain to pray. Of course, I guess you could look at it like mountains made of stone. And of course, the ark settled on Mount Ararat, which is another mountain of stone. So, and in another place it says Jesus and the devil went up to a high place where he was shown everything. So there seems to be some spiritual aspect to high mountainous areas, and I'm wondering. What do you think? Why do you think that is? All cultures, I think, have some connections to high mountains, going up to the mountain to pray, going to seek a higher spiritual plane, whatnot. Why do you think the elevation on specific mountains or geographical areas makes a difference?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I could answer it simply by saying the higher you get, which is, I used to have an old rock climbing shirt that said that. Closer to God, I think it's a metaphorical thing. Closer to the celestial sphere. Ancient cultures had a three-dimensional view of the world. They had the underworld, they had the plane of the living, where we exist, and then they had the celestial world, up in the sky. So getting closer to that, closest to that as possible on the living plane, would involve, going up into the mountains. Mm-hmm. So I think that may be one explanation. That's a fascinating profile right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it gets to the point where you wonder about that. Of course, the Easter Island, although obviously those heads, and I think their bodies really were made of stone. Again, magnificent stone carvings by technology nobody knows, kind of like the crystal skulls. Nobody knows how they didn't put etch marks in those crystal skulls. Again, all that leads to ancient technology somehow, and I guess you could say, the pyramids had 500,000 slaves pulling a stone. I'm just not buying that. Somebody said it was Brown Mountain slides. I said Stone Mountain. This is Brown. Well, still some kind of stone. Anyway, people were stoned up there. So thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Stone Mountain is in Georgia. I think
well, there you go. See, I got my. Now, Jade, you should have told me that already. But yeah, so you got stones everywhere. You got people getting stoned. You got Brown Mountain out there. But let me ask you something. So we're talking about spirits and stone, and if we go down that road, let's just say that a spirit inhabited a stone. Tell me, how would that be? Is it the stone was in an area where there were spiritual things going on? And now I know that biblically there was the point where Jesus met some demons and he caused the demons to go into the pigs, and the pigs went onto the dove off a cliff. But I'm just wondering, spirits went somewhere. Is it possible that there were some kind of spiritual activity going on and the spirits had nowhere to go, so they went into the stones?
I think that's a kind of a metaphor for the energy that these stones contain. Before we had the Greeks who came up with scientific and technical terminology, everything was explained in allegory or in symbolism. So when we talk about a spirit in a stone, I'm not so sure there's a literal meaning to that, so much as there's a metaphorical or symbolic meaning to it. And as I mentioned before, these inanimate objects, they attain or receive spirituality through what is known as agency, or being placed there by a group or a human who have a strong belief system that stone has a spirit. And then they may have, as in the case of what we see behind you in that beautiful profile, that may have been manipulated. That may have, humans may have seen that and shaped it and worked it to express their view that there was a spiritual connection, and there was, because they placed it there, and through the spiritual practices of the natives was very much shamanic. They would believe in the spirits and believe that objects could contain spirits, and that they had the ability to communicate with them through altering their states of consciousness.
The sound went out there for just a second. All right. Here's another question for you. Have you seen the rock formation discovered on Google Earth of the Native American? Do you think that was a natural formation?
You have to say that again. I didn't quite catch the question.
Yeah, it says, have you seen the rock formation discovered on Google Earth of the Native American? I haven't seen it myself.
I haven't. No, I'm not sure what they're referring to.
Okay.
If they can send it in and post it, I haven't seen that Google Earth image. I use Google Earth a lot for doing my measurements. I know that there are things that are found and spotted from Google Earth that are really helping to transform how things are being researched. Mm-hmm. Of course, I do take a GIS approach to plotting the locations of these sites on the map, using GPS coordinates, and then looking for patterns of how they relate to each other. Patterns of distribution and concentration of different features, different elements of these sites, and how they compare to each other. Mm-hmm. So, I'm not sure of what they're referring to. Mm-hmm. Of course, all of North America is referred to as Turtle Island by most native tribes, and there's a interesting mythology to that involving their creation myth.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question for you. What about the balanced rock in the dolmen in New York?
Yes, that's in North Salem. That's a very interesting stone, and there are other ones. Some of the examples were shown behind you of these balanced stones. The one in North Salem is quite well known. It's also known as a cat stone because it does have an aspect to it that looks like a cougar or a panther. And there are other stones very similar to it that have been found in the Northeast. I think of Council Rock in Pennsylvania that is almost identical to the North Salem dolmen. There's pictures of it in my book, a chapter on the research by Dave Gutowski on Council Rock. Yeah. So I'm seeing behind you here what looks like an image that could be shot from Google Earth, showing what looks like a profile of a Native American with a headdress.
Yeah. That is
this, of course, reminds me of some of the work that we see in the desert in Nazca in South America, where you have these geoglyphs on the earth that represent, many of them are geometric shapes, but also there are figures of monkeys and llamas and spiders that were carved into the desert. Mm-hmm. This looks like something. This is interesting. You could argue it's fortuitous that it just happens to look like that, and we, our eyes like to create these types of things with clouds and with rock formations where we see faces. There's I forget the term for it. That's like the Da Vinci phenomenon or something.
Is it like the face on Mars? Are we seeing a face, or are we just seeing a rockscape?
Right, exactly.
Well, I'm seeing a face, so I'm going there.
I see a face too, and there's I always like to reference Professor Gary Urton, URTON. He's the chair of anthropology at Harvard University, and he describes landscapes as representing a living synthesis between people and the land they inhabit. So we may be seeing a landscape in this picture. He goes on to describe skyscapes as being a landscape that contains a portion of the horizon or the sky from which a cultural story can be constructed. So if there were to discover a myth in the desert of the natives who lived there that involved this image that you see behind you, or that we saw a moment ago of the Native American headdress in profile, then that would really, there would be evidence if there was some oral tradition that referred to this. And there's a wonderful picture of Nazca. And I have to mention the chapter in my book by Dave Johnson, because he did a lot of research in Nazca, dowsing the lines and discovering that the geometric ones that run for great distances from the Andes over the Altiplano through Nazca to the Pacific, he correlates with aquifers and areas of higher permeability where the water runs through the groundwater runs through the bedrock as opposed to the river surfaces. Wow. Mm-hmm. And of course, he says that the amorphic animal images are the names of the aquifers. You have the spider aquifer, the llama aquifer, the monkey aquifer. So the natives knew where these water sources were, and Johnson was down there, and they have a terrible drought in Nazca. They don't have any good water. Every time they drill a well, they hit arsenic. And he said, well, you're drilling them in the wrong places. You got to drill the wells where the lines are, because that's where the water is. The lines were marking the water. Mm-hmm. Of course, they considered the lines off limits. They didn't want to drill their wells where this is like a World Heritage Site or something. Mm-hmm. So, but they took his advice. They drilled their wells, and they got gushers. And, it changed the quality of life down in that region.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever walked the ley lines?
I have. There are ley lines in our region. Many of them were documented by a surveyor named Tom Brennan. He showed many of them converge in my area, in the Woodstock area where Overlook Mountain is. There's a convergence of ley lines. And what you find at these spots is a lot of earth energy, but also a lot of natural beauty, a lot of scenic wonders, as we would say. Where these lines intersect.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, didn't it sort of say that there's some other thing going on besides, when you look at a rock, what was that rock doing 100 years ago? Who was looking at that rock, touching that rock? And that, I remember I was looking at rocks in a stream, picking them up, trying to break them. And then I almost had like a guilt feeling, like I was cutting a tree down or something. I was trying to break it open, see if something was inside there. Then all of a sudden, I had almost like a guilt feeling, like I was hurting the rock. Dr. Glenn, what was going on with me?
Well, I think you were relating to those rocks. The rocks were speaking to you, Daniel, and you were receiving a message from them, is what I would say. And the message was one of show us respect. There's something here more than just something inanimate, and I'm not saying that they have nerves or feelings or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But it's if you have a strong belief, if you have a strong sensitivity to this type of thing, then yes, you could be affected by a negative interaction with these stones. You throw one on the ground trying to break it, it might bounce right back and crack you in the skull.
Wow.
Coincidence or a spirits in stone?
So. The stone shall rise up against us. I don't think a flesh organism would survive such a thing. Have you investigated any stone structures in South America? Or are you mainly concentrated in Northeast United States?
Mostly in the Northeast. I do relate the sites here to other sites around the world, like Karnak in France and some of the sites in Southwest United States. Mm-hmm. But no, not really that region.
Mm-hmm. By the way, if you're just joining us, we have on our Newsmaker line via Skype, we have Glenn Crisper talking about his book, Spirits in Stones, The Secrets of Metholithic America. And in that book, you talk about turtles, eyes, compass stones, but then in the thing sent to us from Inner Traditions, it says you also talk about stones of reproductive organs.
Well, these are referring to some of the inscribed stones that were discovered up in a region of the Catskills known as Frost Valley. So these seem to have representations, symbolisms that we find in the Middle East relating to the sacred feminine or the goddess culture that existed there in very ancient times, before the before men ran the show, women ran the show. There was a matriarchal culture the further back you go in history. And when you're talking about ancient Native Americans, you're talking about women having a high place in their culture. When you're talking about the goddess culture in the Mediterranean, also going back before 5,000 years ago, the women were the ones who held a great power. Um, I think that's always a very interesting aspect. We're kind of out of balance now with the patriarchal dominance, and we could learn something from the cultures that had a greater balance between the male and the female. So the sacred feminine, to find symbols of the goddess culture inscribed in stones in the Catskills, is kind of out of place. Now, finding these types of things in the Middle East would be expected because that culture existed there. We're talking about the Tannic symbol, which the Tanit is like the inverted V or triangle, again representing the feminine. Um, we're talking about the symbol for the like the ovaries, which is a oval circle with a line inscribed through it. And this has also been shown to represent the sacred feminine in some of these ancient cultures. So what are we doing finding stones with these inscriptions in Paleo-Phoenician, Paleo-Hebrew, in a valley deep in the Catskills? And the research in my book is based on that of Zena Halpern, a wonderful researcher. She's quite elderly now, and she wrote an amazing book that came out last year called the Templar Voyage to Oak Island and Beyond. So there's a title that will catch you if you're interested in that type of thing. And she says, based on her research, that there was a group of from the Middle East, Judeans who were fleeing Judea about 1000 BC, maybe 800 BC, in ships that carried them to America, and they were followers of a deity known as Ashura. Ashura was in the Bible referred to as the consort of God. It's almost like God's wife.
Well,
she was being purged.
Glenn,
she was being purged, and her followers, fled.
Okay. We always hear in ancient antiquity, the sacred feminine. I'm just wondering if in ancient antiquity there was the sacred masculine, was something called being hard as rock. I don't know. Is that the sacred masculine there? I just pointing that out.
Well, I haven't heard anything specifically referenced that way, but that doesn't mean it. Like I said, I think. I think you did just say that. I think it's more of a question of there was a balance between the.
I like the sacred masculine more than I like the sacred feminine. I'm always hearing about that. So, all right, let's get to another. let's get to another question here. Do you believe that carving a petroglyph in a stone can place a particular spirit in a stone? That's a great question.
Yeah, it is, and that's a very good observation, because I think that's exactly how this process of agency occurs. You identify something, you place meaning in it, and then you give it a marking so that it's memorialized, or you make a votive offering and take a vow that this is important and should be respected and remembered. So studying the ancient inscriptions and the petroglyphs is extremely important, because it gives us insight into the meaning and into the spirituality that's been placed in these stones by those who inscribed them.
In the spirit world, a lot of people say that like ghosts inhabit specific geographical locations because a trauma happened there, or they have unfinished business. Again, that goes to the stones, in that maybe they are being impregnated by spirits, just as, say, a house would be. And I didn't get any responses when I posed the question the first hour. Has anybody had any rock stories? Did they have bad luck or good luck? I haven't either. But again, I do look at rocks and stones as just sort of like you're looking back into history. There's like far away from today's crap that we deal with every day. They're going to go on, and we're going to all be, we'll all be gone, but they're still going to be here. I don't know how long they're going to be here, but it seems like a long time.
Yeah, and they hold a history in them. Every stone on Earth has some magnetite in it, and that magnetite, when that rock was being formed, locked in on where the North Magnetic Pole is, and we've seen through that evidence that the poles have shifted, and there's even evidence that they've shifted in human history. And so, what effect did that have on our existence and on whatever was going on Earth at the time that pole shift occurred? So, there is a history locked in the rocks. I think it has to do with the magnetic properties of the rock. I think I may have mentioned John Burke earlier. John Burke was a researcher, and he wrote a book. He passed away recently, but he wrote a book called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. Maybe it's the other way around, Stone of Plenty, Seed of Knowledge. But he showed that there was electromagnetic properties in stones that could be identified and used to benefit humans in ancient times, one by helping produce greater yields of crops by exposing the seeds to electromagnetic properties that were discovered and mapped by ancient cultures, Native Americans included. Yeah. And Burke also showed that many of the stones set up in Europe had their magnetic polarities. So every large stone has a north and a south polarity to it. The stones at Karnak, Burke showed, were all aligned with their north polarities and south polarities in the same direction, kind of like a particle accelerator, where like the collider in CERN, Switzerland, that they're trying to discover the God particle with. Or they did discover the God particle, and what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, every time you say Karnak, I think of the Great Karnak, Johnny Carson.
You know what? There's an interesting story about Karnak, and you were mentioning the power of water. And a lot of people have different opinions about Karnak, but I did hear a story involving Karnak and communicating. He was in Japan. This is his shtick. This is kind of classic Karnak. He sealed an image in an envelope and left it with somebody in New York. Nobody knew what that image was, and he was in a hotel room in Japan, and he asked somebody to open that envelope. And he said, "But before you open it, I need you to place a crystal glass of water in front of you, and I have a crystal glass of water in front of me." And somehow, and maybe it's a trick, maybe it's just that's what Karnak did, fooled us all. But he was able to identify. He said, "Okay, open that up." And there's a picture in there, and you don't know what it is. You've never seen it before. But it was placed in there without his knowledge, and he didn't know what it was. But he identified the picture as an elephant and blew everybody away. They're like, well, how that, and he somehow, the person concentrating and thinking about that image in New York got transmitted to him somehow through this conduit involving the crystal and the water. And he received the image and described what was in that envelope, claiming to have never saw it before. So then again, that's classic Karnak. But is there something to it? Did he somehow set up a conduit of wireless communication? We do it with our cell phones. We flip them open, call somebody in Japan. It's no big deal. But was there a way for that to take place using natural elements and processes that don't involve, the type of technology we use today to do it?
You talk about limates in the Northeast. Are they native, natural, or nonsense?
Well, I do believe they are native because I think they're the best candidates for having built these things. Natural, probably in most cases, yes, because what you had was groups of these indigenous people who would go out into the territory and survey the land for anything natural that would help them with their belief system, with their worldview, help them express it. So they would find these unusual boulders. They would find these, today the evidence would be landscape archaeology, and they would manipulate the land and features found there to represent their belief system, and I think that was pretty common practice.
Interesting. I rented a trench digger to lay some water lines out to my organic garden, and I hit some stones, and one of those stones threw the chain off. Well, that chain is about 300 pounds. And then so that goes back to your karma thing. Did the stone strike back at Daniel Ott for digging into his lair, you know. And in another place, I hit a pocket of stones, man. There's about this big, but just a pocket. They kept popping up like popcorn. Bam, 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 bam. And, you know, the ground, I've never disturbed that ground before. And all of a sudden they start popping out of the ground. I'm thinking, man, either the stones are running in packs or there's some ancient history here why those stones were gathered in a central area. So I've had some stone activity, uh, Dr. Glenn.
Well, you have to be careful where you dig. You know, as they say, you never know what you're going to run into when you start digging down into the ground. And of course, the deeper you go, the further back in history you go, stratigraphically. So you know, you can't just take at it lightly. You start picking at things with a pickaxe or big heavy equipment, and you know, there could be some kind of reciprocal response.
Well, I was kind of hoping to find a woolly mammoth tusk or something like that. Have you? This is from Dreamwalker. Have you ever heard of the sand conspiracy?
I can't say I have. Does it say what that's about?
No, I don't have any information on that. Another question.
I like that you mentioned about the woolly mammoths,
Yeah.
and in our region in New York, there's a chapter on this as well. There are a lot of mastodons. There's a huge concentration of mastodons that have been discovered and excavated in the Black Earth region of Orange County, just not too many miles south of where I am.
Mhm.
And I was lucky enough to work on a dig there with Michael Gramley, who's the president of the Amateur Archaeological Association of America. And a farmer there tilling his field hit the jackpot when he hit the backbone of a mastodon, and then auctioned off the rights to have it excavated. And Gramley bid on it, but lost. But he was hired by the person who won the rights to excavate this thing. And it was dated to 13,400 years before present. And most interestingly, it's the first example of a mastodon that shows it has been that humans had interacted with it. It had been butchered. It had chop marks on it. It had been disarticulated, and ivory and the bones had been exploited and harvested. And old tools were found on the site that had been discarded and replaced with tools that were made from this mastodon.
Now, historically, does the system tell us that humans lived with mastodons, or they
Yes,
predated?
yes. This
Okay.
is Gramley's evidence, and this site, the Bowser Road site in Orange County, is one of the first sites that that shows that direct evidence. Now, we
So,
do know that there were humans in the region before the megafauna
mhm,
did disappear,
mhm.
probably with the Younger Dryas event and some type of cometary impact that changed the climate drastically, and the megafauna, the big
What
cats,
what
the mastodons disappeared.
mhm. What
But
about
humans were here; they lived through that event. They were affected by it, and some of the ancient lore and mythological stories of the Iroquois talk about, uh, again in a symbolic way, a cometary event. You know, they have an ancient legend of the flaming flying heads that would chase
oh,
the natives through the woods
wow?
and fall into the streams and dry up the rivers and turn the courses into flow a different way.
There's
And to
some
me,
big
this
events
is
right there.
all an allegory for an impact event.
Um, did humans interact with dinosaurs?
That I can confidently say no. I don't think there were humans on Earth 65 million years ago when they met their demise.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's a little fringy
So,
even for
so
me.
yeah. How do we explain the pottery in South America with humans and what is it, stegosauruses riding them? How do we account for those?
Yeah, I've seen some of that stuff. I can't say I can account for it. I just I would say we'd have to figure out when that pottery was made, and if we know for in fact that it was made in a period of time before the knowledge of dinosaurs, uh, had been
Hmm.
discovered, um, you know, it opens the question to how did that get represented. I know there are people and there's a movement that believe there were humans and dinosaurs existing at the same time.
Hmm.
I just don't know if there's enough evidence to really support that. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that doesn't support it.
Hmm.
Um, but there's if you're familiar with the work of Laird Scranton and his work with the Dogon people in Africa and how they were aware in their mythologies and ancient stories of the dog star Sirius being a binary, which wasn't known until the 20th century. Yet there seems to be references to it in their ancient cultures that that they knew about this. Also, a lot of evidence that what we today call the theory of quantum physics was known also in antiquity to some cultures who represented it in their symbolism and stories.
Well, yeah, but there's also variables that's introduced in carbon dating, so I don't know how accurate that is 100% of the time. Here's another question. It says Lake Minnewaska or Minnewaska Lake in Montauk in the Catskills seems to have a very magnetic appeal. What's your take?
Minnewaska is an amazing place. There's stones and sites in my book that are in Minnewaska. So that whole ridge top in the Shawangunk. So Minnewaska is in the Shawangunk Mountains, which is one of the focuses of my book. And there are all kinds of sites there along the ridge top. Many of them identified by a researcher named Salvador Trento in his book probably 30 years ago now called The Search for Lost America, where he documented a lot of these unusual and enigmatic stone sites scattered across the whole country. But he talked about sites in Minnewaska and on the Shawangunk Ridge that I followed up on and found them and tried to put them into the mix of what's going on here. And Montauk, he mentions, there's a great stone out there called Council Rock. That's the beginning of a line called the Hammonasset Line that runs all the way from Montauk through the Catskill region, and a big megalithic stone here called Devil's Tombstone. And then if you project that line, as I've done with software, it continues up to a little island in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan called Manitou Island. Manitou, of course, being the word for the Native American spirit energy. And that's copper country, again, where there's a great mystery of where hundreds of tons of copper that was mined in great antiquity disappeared to. Many think that it was what fueled the Bronze Age in Europe and in the Mediterranean, which would presuppose that there were expeditions here, transoceanic voyages to exploit the copper resources in the Great Lakes region, way before Columbus.
When you go to small shops and probably everywhere in America, and a lot of times they'll have a wooden box full of polished stones, and you go through there and you just want to stick your hand in there to feel it, and it's all smooth and it's cool, and you're kind of milling around in there. Is it possible? You got to figure that who knows how many other people stuck their same hand in there. And I'm just wondering, is it possible that if they have an angry spirit or a lesbo spirit, any kind of weird spirit sticking their hand in there, could that transfer back to the next person sticking their hand in the stones? Could the stones become a vehicle for transference of spirits?
Well, it's an interesting concept. Again, how would you prove that? It sounds like there could be anecdotal stories, legends, myths.
Well, if all of a sudden I want to start watching Ellen or something, or watching Anderson Cooper, I mean, you know what I'm saying? If I stuck my hand in there, wouldn't that be a telltale sign?
You lost me there, Daniel. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at.
Is anybody out there watching know what I was getting at? Hang on. I got to put this up here. No, here. Yeah, right. Okay, all right. Well, we'll just move on from that. I don't know if anybody got that. All right. So, in your research of stones, has it changed any of your basic foundational philosophy about life in general, history? Man, what are you coming away with?
That's another great question. That these sites and these stones contain important messages that we need to understand, decipher, and heed. Those messages may not always be the same, but if they're saved or preserved in stone, then they were probably preserved for the long term and for an important reason. I like to point to the tsunami that happened in Japan several years ago, and I remember reading articles in the paper after that happened. This is the one that involved the Fukushima nuclear power plant there that was destroyed. And I read articles in the papers slightly after that saying that there was a ancient early warning system for tsunamis up and down that east coast of Japan that had been ignored for many centuries. And what it was a series of megalithic stones that had been set up at certain points up and down the coastline and inscribed with a message that people had long forgotten and ignored. And it was a simple message that said to live in balance and harmony for generations to come. Don't build your dwellings beyond this point. Knowing that, eventually, if you're living near the coast, something from the ocean is going to come in and wipe you out because it's happened before. So the message of these stones, and if you were to speak to Doug Harris, who's the tribal preservation officer for the Narragansett in Connecticut, he'll tell you that the stones hold a story of balance and harmony and learning how to live in balance and harmony with each other and with nature. And if anything can be said, we're very much as a society out of balance with nature right now. We're maybe in the period of time where we're learning to try to live in balance with nature, so we don't wipe ourselves out through our foolish behavior and not understanding the forces of nature or preparing for them. Because the messages that are held in these stones don't always portend good things, but they sometimes are warnings of catastrophic things, and we need to learn how to decipher them and understand them for our own survival and preservation as a race.
Yeah. It seems that Jesus tried to give us some lessons about stones using them. He said that those that ignored his teachings, then Jesus becomes a stone of offense to them. And another, he said, unless you build your foundation on the rock, being him, that you're found when the trials of life come by, you'll be washed away. So there's symbology about stones and rocks all through the biblical text, which is thousands of years old. So that it seems like history has been trying to teach us a lot about stones. And Glenn, that's why we want to have you on the program tonight to talk about your view and the things you've learned from your research of spirits and stones. So as we end the program, where can people get that book?
It's available through most online retailers, like the big ones like Amazon or Barnes and Noble. You can order it locally through a bookstore here in Woodstock called Golden Notebook. If you want to give business to a small local bookstore, independent, or you can go to your local small independent bookstore in your hometown and ask them to order it and get it in stock. It's available through all major book retailers.
I have one more question here. I want to get through. It came in with a little caps on it. It says, "What's your opinions of biblical giants that are fallen in the Ural Mountains in Russia?" And there's lots of megaliths there. Have you ever been there, or do you know about those?
I haven't. I'm not that familiar with what the questioner is referring to. I do believe I've read of giant skeletons. I think there's a researcher named Chenard who, like the one I mentioned earlier, Jim Vieira, who's documented them in America. I think it's Patrick Chenard who has documented them in that region. The Urals and the steppes and around the Black Sea and some places like that. So there is some research out there. I'm just not that familiar with it.
Okay. All right. Well, the end of the broadcast here. Glenn Chrisberg, we appreciate you coming on the Edge television broadcast for this evening's interview. How'd you like it?
I enjoyed it, Daniel. Thanks very much. A lot of really interesting, compelling questions. You obviously have a tuned in audience, and I was happy to talk about it.
Okay. All right. I appreciate you coming on the show tonight, Glenn.
All right, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Hope to talk again.
You bet. Bye-bye.